Okay, so just one or two quick announcements. As you've probably seen, the government is sending out free COVID test kits for each address. So you can register. Andrew is going to send along the link through the chat in case you have not yet registered. The government will also be providing some high quality masks to the public. There is no information yet on how we are going to receive them, but look out in the next couple days for news on that. We have two projects tonight, so it's going to be pretty quick. Let's start with 230 Everett Street, and I believe Richard Linz is here to represent that project. So go ahead, Richard.
Good evening, Rachel. Thank you. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Richard Linz. I'm here actually on behalf of both projects this evening. We'll start with 230 Everett Street. My client, Karina Mejia, who I believe is here as well. If she could take a moment to introduce herself. This is her first project in Jeffries Point. Even though she's lived here most of her life, she's excited about.
Oh, sorry, Richard.
Yeah, absolutely. Hi,
everybody. Sorry, I muted Richard by mistake.
Sorry. Yeah, we'll just
sorry about that.
No worries, no problem. Yeah, so if Karina just wants to say a couple of words, introduce herself, that'd be great.
Yeah, absolutely. So, hi everybody. I am Karina. As Rich mentioned, I was born and raised in Eastie, grew up primarily on Sumner Street, and basically have been involved in real estate ever since college, both in my career as a real estate agent and as an investor. I do a lot in East Boston and kind of the surrounding areas, primarily with new construction, and have basically just seen how much East Boston has transformed over the past 20 years. And it's inspired me to get involved on this side of the industry, and just super excited to put this project in front of you. And I think it would be very empowering for me and my community to be able to do it.
Thanks, Karina. We also have Chris Prudhomme from Zephyr Architects, who's our project architect as well. So let's get right into it. Andrew, if we could advance the slide, please. So what we're proposing here is the demolition of the existing single-family structure. I do have the slide here from the MACRIS database. There is no specific historical significance with respect to this property, which is something that we analyze for each project that we do that involves a demolition. This would involve the proposed construction of a new 7-unit residential structure. We would be including off-street parking for seven vehicles. These are all pretty generously sized 2-bedroom, 2-bath. The average square footage is about 1,000 square feet. Most of the units are a little over 1,000 square feet. One of the units is just under 900 square feet. This would be intended for home ownership upon completion. Next slide, please. Just a quick bird's eye view. We can always jump back to these for reference, but just to give you an idea of what we're looking at here, you do see Artie Street here going down towards Maverick. Our building is just beyond the Artie Street intersection. Next slide, please. Just again, different bird's eye views. You get a context of what the surrounding neighborhood looks like. Next slide. Next slide. As our street view, the existing structure. This does sit on a what I would consider for this district a double size lot at 4,500 square feet. It is larger than the minimum lot size that is required. It's actually large enough for two lots. Next slide, please. Just looking down Everett towards Jeffrey Street. Next slide. And looking back towards Artie. Next slide. So our BPD abstract, we do show the width of the lot at 45 feet, about 100 feet in depth. This is located in 3F 2000 district. I do show the hash marks for the flood zone. The rearmost portion of the property appears to be somewhat located in the flood zone. However, we are going to do an analysis of the elevation for the site. Next slide, please. As I mentioned previously, the historical significance for this property has been analyzed. There are no records showing any inventory for this property or any particular identification of any significance at all in the MACRIS database. Next slide, please. So I'm going to let Chris jump in here and work on talking through the actual design and the approach to the concept, bearing in mind this is our first presentation. So this is a first pass at the project, but I think many of you may be familiar with some of Zephyr's projects. They've done a number of projects in the Jeffreys Point neighborhood. So Chris, if you want to jump in and start talking a little bit about our design approach, that'd be great.
Thanks, Richard. Yeah, so what we're trying to do here is take some of the vernacular of the street. Much of this side of the street, as well as the facing the other side of the street, has a flat face facade that sits right at the property line. What we're trying to do is create some recess with these kind of wooden bays that create the Juliet balconies. We believe that that interaction and that connection for the tenants and units to the street level not only provides connection for the tenants to the street and to the community, provides access to fresh air, as well as eyes on the street, which generally improves safety and quality of street life. We're trying to utilize the full width of the lot. We have next to the adjacent properties do similar. So we're just trying to fill in the streetscape. The lot is twice as wide as the kind of typical width of the lots in this area. So we're trying to maximize that and allow for as much kind of natural light into these units with the large modern windows, as well as those bays with the sliding doors. We have provided one-to-one parking, 7 units and 7 parking spaces, all 2-bedroom units with the exception of the first floor roll-in, which is fully accessible single unit. We are looking to add an additional floor here, but within reason. We believe that we kind of fit within the context of the neighborhood, and we're not trying to kind of exceed too much of the surrounding neighborhood and FAR. Beyond that, I'd be happy to take any questions you have regarding the design. I believe that we do have some floor plans to show that kind of represent the quality of units that we're trying to show, and the site plan. Otherwise, I'm happy to take any questions.
Yeah, we have a few more. So if we could just advance the slide, Andrew, that'd be great. So I think what we're showing here is just sort of a little bit of the context of how this relates to the surrounding properties. We do show a roof deck that does have somewhat of a penthouse located on top. I know this is incorporated because of the way the building code requires these type of access to the roof deck. Anybody who's familiar with the way the Board of Appeal has been approaching this, the requirement is that we eliminate any type of roof structure for any head house above the 4th level. And we certainly will be revisiting that. One of the reasons we do incorporate this at this early stage is because our submittal must be compliant with the building code, and there's sort of a disconnect between the zoning board and ISD on how these have to be filed. But I can assure you that as this proceeds, if we're going to continue with the 4-story building, our proposal would eliminate this ultimately before it gets to the Board of Appeal. Next slide, please. Just showing our site plan. This is important for purposes of demonstrating the actual setback of the building from the rear property line. We actually exceed the setback requirement of the zoning code. We are showing a little bit over 40 feet from the rear portion of the property to the rear property line. Again, you do see that flood boundary here towards the back. We're not proposing to build any structures within the flood zone. And again, we will review that through the elevation process and to determine whether or not we're actually subject to any floodplain requirements. The only issue here would be an order of conditions from the Conservation Commission for any work that is done in the flood area. But as you can see, predominantly, the predominant portion of the site is located outside of the flood zone. We show the 7 parking spaces located to the rear, 4 along the property line to the side, and then 3 along the back with the reserve area here. Next slide, please. Showing our lower level, we access, as you saw from the elevation that Chris had gone over, we do access the property through a garage door that leads to the rear portion of the property. And we show our accessible unit located at the lower level. This is a 2-bedroom unit And this would be available for persons requiring ADA accessibility and adaptability. This would be the smaller of the 7 units. This one is just over 850 square feet. Next slide, please. Chris, if you want to talk a little bit about the just the layout of the units and how we arrived at the sort of spread of the units, that would be helpful.
Absolutely. So what we're trying to do here is be fairly efficient with our kind of egress. We do have 2 means of egress out of each unit as required by code, and 2 sets of stairs that bring us out to 2 different means of egress to the outdoors. But what we're trying to do is create these kind of mirrored units, one facing the street and one facing the rear yard, that provide an ample amount of central common area between the open living space, kitchen, and dining area, with the 2 bedrooms kind of flanked on either side of the space. There is 2 bed, 2 bath, 1 ensuite and the mechanical laundry in unit space as well off the kitchen. Relatively simple plan, but we think it's a good use of space that provides adequate kind of living quarters and does not detract from the open living space by providing bedrooms that kind of are ill-suited for kind of living these in a modern way. So
great. And yeah, and again, these units are just over, I believe, Chris, if I'm not mistaken, these are a little over 1,100 square feet or 1,050 square feet each.
yes, that's correct.
So generously sized units. Next slide, please. Just so, again, our elevations, and this is more of the one-dimensional view so that you can see what the actual height of the building is. The height to our roof rafter, Chris, I believe is 42.5 to 43 feet as measured from the sidewalk. We show our roof deck, and again, that head house that is being shown for purposes of compliance to the building code, but if this were to proceed to the Board of Appeal, would be eliminated in the final analysis because the board does not necessarily approve those. Next slide, please. And just showing the left elevation as well as the rear with the balconies shown off the back. Next slide, please. So our zoning analysis, this is, as I said earlier in my presentation, this is sufficient enough to create 2 lots. So 4 units would be allowed as a matter of right. 7 units is what we're proposing. So 3 additional units, which just does require a variance because it's considered a multifamily. We have more than sufficient minimum lot size, lot width, and lot frontage. Our front yard would also be a modal setback, as well as our rear yard, which would measure at 40.5 feet, well in excess of the 30 feet that's required. Our side yards are shown at 1.5 feet, both left and right. I believe that we would be incorporating some setbacks for any windows that would be added to that side of the either side of the property based upon the building code requirements. That does require a 2.5 foot setback, so we are requesting a variance for 1 foot at this time. The flood area ratio, the amount of square footage that we're proposing in relationship to the amount of square footage that we have for land, would be a 1.91. And therefore, because it exceeds the 1.0 that's allowed, we do require a variance for that as well. Height of our building, just over 42 feet, call it 43 feet, 4 stories, 3 stories, 35 feet is the maximum height limit. We are requesting a variance for the 8 feet in the additional story. The minimum open space is below the minimum requirement of 300 square feet per unit. We are about 170 square feet per unit, so a variance would be necessary for that. And last but not least is parking. Even though we are providing a 1-to-1 ratio, a total of 9 spaces would be required when you do the calculation under the zoning code. So therefore, we do require a variance for the 2 additional spaces. Next slide, please. So we started this process and we are moving through in the ordinary course with our petition file with the zoning board. We are in the community process phase, which would involve both an abutters meeting and a meeting before the neighborhood association, which is the JPNA. We anticipate that we are likely to come back for a further subcommittee discussion before we proceed to a voting meeting at JPNA. We anticipate, just based upon the way the schedule is going right now, we probably won't be before the zoning board until sometime late this winter, perhaps even early spring. Assuming we get our approvals, we'll go through the BPDA design review process. And the earliest we might see a permit is spring, summer of 2022. And again, that assumes we get our approvals. Construction would begin summer, fall of 2022 at the earliest, would take about 12 months to complete. Next slide, please. I believe that's the last slide, Andrew.
Okay, and just as a reminder to everybody, we do all of the questions in the chat with the exception of direct butters, who I will call out. So please keep yourself muted. Remember, you can enter your questions in through any time during the presentation, so that you don't have to wait until the end, so that you're rushing to get your question in. For this particular project, the direct abutters that are within a 300-foot radius that registered within the 24-hour time period before the meeting that we require, so that they can speak aloud, are Brian Gannon, Garrett Riddle, Devon Cody, Marie Long, and Kathy Schindeldecker. If any of those people, go ahead, Brian, you can unmute yourself.
Yeah, I just think this is it's just too large for Everett Street, and I think the way you showed the frontage of the house next to the houses on the side, like it would be better if you shared it, accurately with what the actual structures are on the side of the house, just because it just looks so out of place. Given that you're asking for 7 units, we could assume there's going to be about 14 cars there, and you're asking for a variance to reduce the number of cars from 9 to 7. Given that they're 2-bedroom units, I mean that's just too much traffic, too many cars for Everett Street, and especially in context with all the new developments that just happened on Everett Street. Like I think there's probably 25, 30 new units on Everett Street, that have just been completed recently. So we don't even know the impact of the traffic and safety of the street. I have a family just a few houses up, and I think it's just going to increase the traffic on the street. The other thing is just, given that as of right, looks like out of the 10 requirements, you're looking for a variance on 6 of them. And I think that's just excessive. I think if you were to build 4 units as of right, you would still achieve probably a pretty decent profit. And I think you're just overbuilding the lot here for this residential street. And was that unit that you mentioned that was like accessible, is that in the basement?
No, and thanks for your comments, Brian. No, the unit is at grade. So it would be entered at the sidewalk level, Brian.
Okay. Yeah, I just think it's too big. I think it's just too much for our little street to handle. So I'd appreciate if you'd trim it up a bit, and ideally stay within what zoning has set forth. So.
Thank you.
Okay, and the next person who has their hand up is Garrett Riddle.
Hi, good evening. I personally like the design, and I feel it's actually consistent in size with several other renovated and new buildings in the immediate area. There's actually 3 I can think of within a rock's throw that are grade level parking with 3 floors above. So as an abutter, I'm in support.
And just a reminder, only the people who I read their names are able to speak aloud. If other people have questions, you do need to enter it in through the chat. So again, it's Brian Guerin, Garrett Riddle, Devon Cody, Marie Long, and Kathy Schindeldecker. Those are the only people that registered 24 hours in advance. Okay, so we'll move to the questions in the chat. This is just a comment here. This is a real opportunity lost. The overwhelming majority of new construction in the neighborhood is 2 bedrooms. I would like to see 1 fewer unit and 2 3-bedroom units. So just a comment there. That's never mind.
Andrew, I'm sorry. I just want because I can't read the comments. So they're looking for more 3-bedroom units. Is that?
It seems as though they're disappointed with how many 2 bedrooms are there, and
Okay.
they would like to see some 3-bedroom units.
Okay.
I think you may have touched on this, Richard. It says, can you talk about the large blocky thing on the roof? What is that, and does it need to be so big?
Yeah, I apologize. And you normally we try not to include it, but what you're seeing is what we file with ISD. So the reason we have to include that is the state building code says that access to a roof deck cannot be through a hatch once you get to 4 stories. So you have to show a head house or stairwell that is accessible for purposes of egress off of the roof deck. The sort of the getting in the weeds a little bit here, but the Board of Appeal actually does not like head houses, and they are reluctant to grant relief for projects where we do show a head house, which is sort of at odds with what the state building code says. So what we do is, for purposes of the plans that get filed, and in the interest of transparency, I'm showing you what's been filed with ISD, but we will likely, before we get to the Board of Appeal, eliminate that and request what's called building code relief in order to access the decks from a hatch. So there will be no visible structure above the top level. You'll just have the actual roof deck itself. This is a very early pass at the plans. I suspect, and I know that Chris has a lot of experience with this, that you will probably see something along the lines of a transparent railing system for the roof deck, something very low profile, doesn't have a lot of impact visually for that roof deck.
Yeah, and just to kind of add to that for Richard, we have set the roof decks back so that from the street level, they're not visible either. So in the case where there is some amount of it that is seen from the pedestrian street level, we do try to make it as transparent or kind of non-invasive as possible. But we also make every attempt at setting those decks back while still providing adequate space up there so that it's not obtrusive and easily seen from the public. But Richard did hit on that quite well. The current building code is very much at odds with the current zoning of whether or not you can use a head house or a hatch. And in these early stages, the hatch is not the head house is what is required for egress at this point.
Okay, and I'm sorry, just to keep reiterating this, but we have people that keep unmuting themselves. Remember, only the people that I read your names aloud are able to speak tonight. And if you'd like to speak at the next P&Z for this project, you can make sure you register in advance. 24 hours in advance is what we require, just so that we're able to make sure that you are actually in a direct butter to the project. But you're more than welcome to put your question in the chat. So continuing on with those chat questions, what would be the expected timing to complete and amount of permitting that would be required? Would the parking be subjected to lower elevation and thus flooding?
So the timing from once if I understand the question, Andrew, is timing from when the approvals are granted to the actual construction. You're probably looking at, between zoning approvals and permitting, somewhere around 4 months. And once the permit issues, I would expect that the entire process, start to finish, would take about 12 months total.
Okay, the next question is, would trees need to be removed, and if so, would they be relocated?
So good question. And I did actually talk to Chris about this before the meeting, and Karina and I reviewed this. So there is a tree on the site that would be removed. It is on private property, so there is no tree hearing process for it. However, Karina has indicated that she is more than willing to make a contribution, whether it's through the Fund for the Parks or some other appropriate organization, for planting of additional trees somewhere in Jeffries Point or wherever they may be needed. To the extent we can add a street tree, we will look at that as well. I'm just not sure what the sidewalk width is or the proximity to the nearest tree would be, but all in favor of adding trees or adding funds to add additional trees in Jeffries Point.
Okay, and I think you may have mentioned this as well, but if you could reiterate, how many beds and baths are in each unit?
Chris, if you could, I don't know if you have
Yep.
that quick breakdown.
I got it up here. So the bedroom on that first floor, sorry, the unit on the first floor is a 1 bed, 1 bath, fully accessible. The units on the subsequent floors above are all 2 bed, 2 bathroom.
Andrew, I don't know if I answered the previous, there was one additional question regarding parking and if that would be affected by flood. The flood design requirements don't really apply to parking areas. The flood zone itself doesn't necessarily mean that there's an actual water issue on the site. It's just actually based on elevation in relationship to the FEMA floodplain. As long as we're not building habitable space in the flood zone, there really is no restriction relative to what we're proposing. If there's any concern from abutting property owners relative to what type of impact construction may have because they may be located in a flood zone, our requirement for any project, especially a project of this size, is to have on-site stormwater management. We will have to put an infiltration system on the site, which doesn't presently exist today. And by doing so, we actually will assist or help with the issues of runoff on the site. We have to handle it and collect it all within the site itself and release it into the city system at a pace that's acceptable to the Boston Water and Sewer Commission. We're also likely to be subject to the new overlay in East Boston, which is known as GCOD. It stands for Groundwater Conservation Overlay District. And there's a specific analysis that needs to be done by our civil engineer on this project to ensure that we're creating no harm with respect to any groundwater recharge. So that's all part of new regulations and requirements for new construction in the city of Boston. We will have to, obviously adhere to all of those requirements.
Okay, the next comment is, can you provide the community with the actual renderings that you'll be presenting to the ZBA? As a community, we'd like to see what is being presented before bringing a property to a vote.
Sure. At this time, and I'm sure members of the P&Z can confirm this, at this time, what we're providing you is what we have on file with the city of Boston. As the project evolves, what we provide the JPNA is what we're presently presenting to the city of Boston. Before we request a vote on this, we have to have a refusal letter that we would submit to the JPNA. And that refusal letter will also be accompanied by the final set of plans that we would present to the zoning board. So as we move through this process, both the P&Z as well as the abutters process, we may make tweaks and adjustments to this building. And as we do that, there'll be iterations that will be updated with the plans, and we obviously will provide that through this process.
Okay, this comment is just about the renderings themselves. The renderings showing the floor plans are very small and impossible to review and evaluate. I look forward to being able to read them when you return to show this project again.
So they may be a little difficult to read in the context of the Zoom meeting, but I believe, if I'm not mistaken, Andrew,
they were a bit blurry. They're not typically like that. So
I'm sorry. Okay, so what I'll do is I can send you the source file for the actual drawings. It just may be the way it came through in the PDF.
okay.
I will forward that over so you at least have the actual source file.
Okay, and next comment, this project is a little extreme. We go from 1 unit to 7 on this crowded street. So many more bedrooms, so many more cars. The next comment, will the plans be posted to the meeting minutes? So I'm not sure to answer that question. Mary, is that something that you
plans do? The plans that were shown in the meeting are already posted to the website. I imagine, Rachel, that if Richard forwards additional plans, you'll post them to the website.
Correct. Yes,
Yeah,
they're all in the
it's
project
Google.
folder.
The Google Drive, yeah.
So Rachel, what I'll do is, if it's okay with you, I'll forward you the actual PDF from our architect, which is the set that we incorporate into the slide deck, and sometimes depends on the quality, but sometimes it may get distorted, but you'll have the actual plans that we have.
Okay. Great,
And
thank you.
if for those listening, if you have the email that came out with the agenda for the meeting, there are links there that bring you to the Google Drive. that contain the files for this project. So if we receive anything additional, we'll be posting them there.
Andrew, Brian just has his hand raised. I don't know.
Oh, Brian, sorry, go ahead.
All right, hello. Yeah, no, I was just looking at the satellite and back to that tree question. It looks like there's like 5 giant trees on that property. Richie, can you show that slide again, the one with the trees on it?
I think
Or with the satellite view?
Yeah,
Oh, Andrew, sorry.
Great, Rachel, yeah.
Oh, Susan.
Oh my God.
Susan, I'm sorry.
I don't know who's doing what tonight.
I don't know who's doing it.
Yeah, there are a lot of trees there.
Yeah, so I think we see as one, this is probably the best view here, is 1, 2, perhaps 3 trees within the property boundary, and the other trees maybe on the adjoining property.
Yeah, well, there's a really large one in the back that's on that property that is sort of the canopy for Everett Street, really, in that back part.
Yeah. Yeah, these are all located within private property boundaries, so they're not considered public shade trees.
And also just a question for Karina is, I know Karina was the realtor on this property. Is she in fact the developer, or is she handing it over to a developer?
No, she's the developer. This is her maiden voyage into East Boston development.
I can just say a comment as well. I am handling it's not my first rehab. I am managing an out-of-state renovation and own multiple properties. It is my first new development project.
Okay.
Thank you.
Will the parking be fully enclosed, or will it be open?
I believe one of the spaces is covered. Is that correct, Chris? And the remaining are exterior.
Correct. One of them is kind of covered by the overhang of the building. The others are not covered. They will be out in the open. However, they will be fully screened from the pedestrian view.
Okay, this next comment. It is no secret area is landfill and sinking.
Yeah, so I've actually done a number of projects in the immediate vicinity and pretty familiar with the soil conditions. Obviously, any project that moves forward, ISD requires that we have a geotechnical analysis done on the soil conditions. We have an engineer, structural engineer, that will be required to submit a set of plans for any foundation that's being designed. This will not require a full foundation below grade. Typical basement won't have that. This will be slab on grade. So the excavation is not as invasive as a project that has a full foundation that goes 8 feet below. Okay,
and again, it's 7 units and 7 parking spots, correct?
Correct.
Yes.
Okay, that was the next question. The next one, building on Artie Street has cracked foundation. 3 townhouses in back have stress crack rear building that has been repaired. Basements are being flooded. Is the parking included in the sale of the condo? This is all from the same person, sorry.
I don't know anything about the stress fractures or whatever we're talking about on Artie. I don't know what that refers to. The units, when we have a situation where we can provide 1 parking space per unit, yes. The plan to market these would be to have 1 parking space assigned to each unit. I always say this, Andrew, in the interest of transparency, when you have a condominium association, there is the opportunity that somebody may not have a vehicle. And if so, they can trade within the association to allow for other unit owners to go ahead and rent additional spaces if somebody doesn't use a space because they have a car. But in this case, they would be sold with the parking space attached to the unit.
Okay, next question. This seems to be a rare parcel with open space to build / pave over almost all of it with the concession of planting trees elsewhere and providing runoff management when open space already does that seems absurd. Open green space is a marketable asset. Why not build fewer units with more open space?
Yeah, so I don't want to confuse, and let's define what open space is. A definition that is thrown around a lot. Open space is park space or space that's owned by a public or nonprofit agency. This is privately owned land. It's not considered open space. It's considered area that's undeveloped within the parcel. So even though it doesn't have any structures on it currently, zoning does allow for more development on the site. Certainly we are asking for variances, and we're willing to go through the process to listen to what those concerns might be. But I don't want to confuse the issue here. This is not quote unquote open space.
But Richie, the zoning just allows for 4 units.
Right, but when we use the term open space, we're suggesting that somehow it needs to remain open. That's not accurate.
Mary, you have your hand up. Did you want to speak?
Yeah, I just wanted to, as a point of information, let people know that if they do go to our website to the post for this meeting, they will be able to see a link that'll take them directly to the project folder. There's 2 links, one to the project folder for this project and another for the presentation that was shown this evening. I just want to make sure people have an easy way to get there.
Okay, we've got a couple more comments in here. This person's also saying, I had many calls for engineers and lawyers to look into problems near the site. I'm not sure what it's.
I don't know what that means.
But it says open space is a zoning requirement. It says so on your slides.
Yeah, so open space is the amount of space that's available for recreation or use outside of the building itself. We don't even include the actual roof decks as part of that. We probably could do a further analysis and come up with a better calculation, but we're slightly below what the requirement is for the open space requirement under Article 53.
Okay. Anybody else have any questions to put in the chat? All righty.
Okay, just sorry.
Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it.
Okay. Before we go to the next product, I just forgot to introduce the board members. So I am Rachel Bloomerth. I am the co-chair of the Jeffreys Point Neighborhood Association. Margaret.
My name is Margaret and I am co-chair. Susan.
Hi, I'm Susan Huang. I am the vice chair. Andrew.
I'm Andrew Pike. I'm the treasurer.
I'm Mary Cole. I'm
Oh.
the secretary.
Sorry, Mary.
All right, we are going to move on now to 306 Sumner Street, also
And
presented.
sorry, real quick before we do, just to clarify for everybody who's on the call right now, if you feel that you're a direct butter and would like to speak at the next meeting for this project, please just make sure that you register 24 hours in advance so that we can verify your eligibility to speak as an abutter. That's just a requirement so that we're able to verify you. So I hope everybody understands that, because there were quite a few people that were trying to unmute themselves and talk, and I just wanted to make sure that that was clear to everybody as to how that works. But again, you can always put your question in the chat at any time during the presentation. So sorry, go ahead, Rachel.
No problem. Go ahead, Richard, on 306 Sumner Street.
Thank you, Rachel and members of the board. Again, Richard Lins on behalf of the petitioner. My client Caio Simeo is here with us tonight. Also Eric Zackerson, who is the project architect. We can jump right into the introductory slide. I believe this is our first presentation on this. So existing 3-family dwelling, we're proposing a complete renovation with both the rear and vertical addition. We would be changing the occupancy to a 4-unit dwelling. These would all be 3-bedroom, 2-bath units. This is intended for home ownership upon completion. Next slide, please. Quick overview. This is that, I say the first block after Orleans, located along Sumner Street. Next slide. Bird's eye view, just to get an idea of the relationship of the buildings, both left and right. Next slide. Head-on view, looking if you were from Webster Street. Next slide. Street view, next slide. Looking down towards Cottage, next slide. Looking back up. Next slide. So this is 3F 2000 zoning subdistrict, similar to the last project. Our lot here is a little over 2,400 square feet with about almost 25 feet of frontage along Sumner. You can see the extent of the buildings, both left and right, that some of them do go back roughly 3/4 of the lot, some about halfway to the midpoint of the lot. Next slide, please. So we're showing the proposed elevation. If you recall, and I thank Eric for incorporating this in, if you recall, we did present 304 Sumner Street some time ago, different owner, different developer. However, Eric was also the project architect on that as well. What he's done here is incorporated what we have for 304 as well as what now we're going to do at 306. Eric, if you want to talk a little bit about the design and the approach here, that would be helpful.
Sure. Thanks, Rich. The intent is to try and work with the existing first two stories of brick and try and maintain that part of the fabric while adding the third and recessed fourth story up above that. And we had some fairly positive feedback on 304, and this owner actually came to us because they liked the look of 304 and how that had come together. So they asked if there was a way that we could kind of make it very similar with the same kind of strategy of respecting the existing brick color or existing brick and refreshing that and then working above that. So the materials you'd see above that are kind of typical cement fiberboard slat siding, taking tones from the street, from up the street, and then the brick. We're trying to maintain the existing brick, which you see on it, then two buildings to the left of the project. So that's the main idea, is to try and respect and use that on the front facade.
Next slide, please, Andrew. So looking at our site plan, we are set back from our proposed rear decks about a little over 20 feet, the building itself being 24 feet from the rear. This is pretty consistent with the extent of the building located immediately adjacent at 304 that we're attached to. We do maintain the little over 3-foot setback on the right side, which is consistent with Article 53's requirements. Next slide, please. So just showing our floor plan layout, we are not proposing anything, I believe, right? Correct, Eric? We're proposing nothing in the basement. It'll be first, second, third, and then the proposed new fourth level. Next slide. You can see here the fourth level, which would be the addition, as well as the rear portion of the building as well. And then what we have is the roof. We're not proposing any roof deck above the fourth level. Next slide. Our elevations, both front and rear, showing the rear decks off of the back, as well as the fourth level with the setback, as Eric described. Next slide. Showing our right side elevation, you can see that fourth level, again, step back, very similar and consistent with what we did at 304. You do see the windows that are included because we do have the appropriate setback on the right side. The building does slope, the property does slope down towards the rear. As you can see, the elevation change from Sumner Street to the rear of the property. Next slide. Left side of the building, because this is attached at the party wall between 304 and 306, we would not have any windows on this side of the building. Next slide. So by way of relief, being in the 3F 2000 district, we do require relief for the additional unit that we are proposing. We do have sufficient lot size at 2,450 square feet, as well as lot frontage. We do meet the requirements for side yard because we are attached on the left side. Article 53 does not require a side yard when you're attached. We do have 3.2 feet, as I showed in that site plan, where 2.5 feet is all that's required, so we do comply. We're not changing anything with respect to the front of the building, but we would already comply with the existing modal, so therefore no variance is necessary for front yard setback. Our rear yard, as I described, is actually 24 feet from the building, but 20 feet from the rear decks, and therefore a variance for about 9, almost 10 feet would be required for the rear. Our floor area ratio, the total amount of gross floor area that we have in relationship to the amount of land that we have is 2.5, which exceeds the 1.0 that's permitted. So a variance for 1.5 is necessary. We're slightly above the 35-foot height limit, but consistent with that, which is being built now at 304, almost identical in height and 40.5 feet total with 4 stories. And then we would have about 730 square feet of open space in that rear yard. We are not proposing a roof deck and therefore would not have an opportunity to create additional space. So we do need a variance for the 470 square feet deficiency. Our parking, because this is already a pre-existing 3-unit dwelling, we're only required to have 1 additional parking space under the zoning code for the additional unit that we're proposing. Consistent with the city's policy, even if we were able to provide parking, the city would likely not approve a curb cut for 1 off-street parking space, and therefore a variance would be requested instead. So we're going to request the variance for the 1 additional spot. Next slide, please. Similar process as the last project. We expect this probably will be through the zoning board process sometime later this winter, early spring. Again, assuming approval, it'll have the typical BPD design review with the permit issuance spring, summer of 22, with construction beginning by summer 22 at the earliest. Take about 8 to 10 months to complete. Next slide. I believe that's it. Happy to answer any questions.
All right, trying to unmute myself here. Excuse me. The abutters who are registered 24 hours in advance and are eligible to speak at the meeting are the following: Kate Bergstrom, Jeff Kimball, Gerard Picardi, and Andrew Tilden. If you are present and you would like to speak, please raise your hand in the raise hand function in the meeting. I'll give you a moment to figure that out if you'd like to. Okay, there's only one question in the chat, and if someone who's in a butter does decide they'd like to ask a question in the meantime, raise your hand. What does almost identical in height mean? What are the height differences between the abutting buildings?
I say almost identical because I don't have the slide in front of me, but Eric, I'm sure Eric could answer that. Are they identical, Eric? I probably over lawyered that.
Yeah, I can tell you it's identical to the one we worked on. I actually don't know exactly what the other 2 neighbors are offhand, but could figure that out.
When I say almost identical, I apologize, Andrew. I don't have the height in front of me, so if it's a few inches difference, but it's probably to the naked eye would seem identical. I just don't know what the exact height is.
Okay, and then you mentioned that this is my own question. You mentioned that there's no roof deck planned, correct?
Correct.
And will the top floor unit be being sold with roof rights?
So normally in the condo docs, we do incorporate that. If they were to elect to ask for a roof deck, they would have to go through their own process to do so.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else have any other questions? I don't have anything else in the chat at the moment.
I just for clarification, I don't, Eric, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't believe 304 requested a roof deck either.
No.
That may be the reason.
Okay. That's all.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for coming. Just a reminder that our next monthly meeting in February is actually going to be on February 7th, since the following week is Valentine's Day. So mark your calendars. February 7th will be our next monthly meeting. Also, if you are interested in getting more involved with planning and zoning and development in the neighborhood, we do have a planning and zoning subcommittee that assists the board in attending ZBA hearings, making decisions on projects. Really, really fun way to get involved in the community. So if it's something you're interested in, we are always looking for new members of our P&Z committee. So please email board@jeffreyspoint.org and we can tell you a little bit more about the position. Thank you, everyone, and have a good evening. And if the board can stay back, that would be great.